Order, order. Welcome to the third part of our discussion this morning on the Commonhold and Leasehold Reform Bill. Could I ask our guest to introduce himself, please?
Yes, I'm Richard Best. I'm a crossbencher and independent in the House of Lords. I gave my maiden speech on the Commonhold and Freehold Reform Bill 2002, 25 years ago, but I chaired the Regulation of Property Agents Working Group in 2018-19. I'm still waiting for it to be implemented. Yeah.
Thank you for coming before the committee this morning, Lord Best. Will.
Thank you, Chairman. Lord Best, my constituency of Woking, the top issue that is raised by constituents is housing. And one of the common themes is rogue managing agents. It's a wild west out there. We have got awful examples of customer service. The fact that they're not regulated is a great injustice, is my view. Why do you believe this bill doesn't lance that boil and correct that historic wrong, the thing that you've almost campaigned for since you came to this building?
Right. Well, first of all, I think regulation is unfashionable. So there are voices that say don't regulate, it'll be anti-growth. I think it's an absolutely false argument. Good regulation actually gives confidence in an industry, it builds trust, it's about growth, it helps growth, and the industry itself welcomes, wants. I think you've heard all your witnesses from whichever part of the sector they come from. They all say that regulation would be a good thing. So I think that regulation being unfashionable should not be an inhibiting factor. The best interpretation of government doing very little about this is that they're waiting for a moment for a really comprehensive, proper regulatory bill, a separate bill that would cover letting agents and estate agents as well as managing agents. We'd have a proper, comprehensive bill with a proper regulator. If government says that's what they're going to do, well, I'll be patient and wait a bit longer. But I think the real reason is lack of resource within MHCLG to get on with handling this. I mean, it requires 3 civil servants for 3 weeks, by my estimation, a very vague back-of-the-envelope estimation, but it needs people on the case to actually get this together. The Office of the Parliamentary Counsel, Michael Gove said, is lacking the capacity for it to intervene, write the legislative clauses, do the work. If only people would get to work on it. It isn't that difficult. There's a lot of stuff out there already. We've got Danny Beals's private members bill already drafted. I think it wouldn't take too much, and government should get on with it. But I think it is the complexity of the bill, all the other things getting in the way. They haven't had the resource to embrace this element as well, but they should have done.
Thank you. A follow up on 2 separate things. What discussions have you had with ministers, particularly Matthew Pennycook, who I know has highlighted, not via this bill, Will, but maybe via another bill, we might tackle this issue? What discussions have you had with them about other legislation to regulate managing agents? And both yourself and then Lord Gove last week highlighted, effectively it's the Treasury stopping this because they're concerned about the financial impact. I agree with you that actually providing certainty for the sector and giving confidence to consumers that it's safe to buy a flat again would be really helpful. But what concerns do you have that the Treasury is blocking this?
I don't think Treasury is saying this is going to be incredibly expensive, because it isn't. You know, a modest levy on 5 million leaseholders, even if all of it is passed on by the managing agents, can pay for an awful lot. There might be a need for some seed corn at the beginning, which Treasury would have to stump up just to get things started. But this will be self-financing, and it shouldn't be. I don't think that's really an argument. I think it is the sheer complexity of all of this. We've heard how complex things are just today, and dealing with 121 Law Commission recommendations does require a lot of input and a lot of civil service time, and this hasn't been allocated to cover this, unfortunately. Oh, just in terms of meetings with Matthew Pennycook, I am meeting him again in about a week with Danny Beales, who's done the private members bill. Matthew's always been very sympathetic, and in opposition, politicians in both ends of this Parliament have been very favourably disposed toward regulation. Just getting round to it, getting the clauses together, getting the legislation packaged properly, it's been low on the list of priorities.
So the minister's not said no to regulation at some point, it's just they're working on it, they're considering it, it's low list on the priorities.
The minister said yes to professionalising the sector, to qualifications, to including, Steve Reed has mentioned this, the lettings agents for the private rented sector and estate agents for the sales sector. All sweet words of comfort for me, but not actually in the bill.
Sean and then Chris.
Lord Best, last week we heard from campaigners on this issue that they actually didn't want regulation of managing agents because they were concerned that would actually just pass the costs on to them as leaseholders. Do you have any comment on that? Because that would seem to me to be a fairly important piece of testimony.
Yeah, I think that this shouldn't be incredibly expensive. Managing agents are bound to pass the cost on one way or another, or at least most of the cost. I suspect that's what happens. But it isn't spread across, a regulator spread across a whole industry is not a huge burden. I think they're worrying unnecessarily, especially if we can get government to give the start-up costs. You've got to appoint somebody, get an office, do those things before you get going. And if that's done by government, a relatively modest input from government, we talked in my working group about 5 million, maybe 10 million. Yes, it's annoying, but if government puts up a certain amount of seed corn at the beginning, then the thing can run itself thereafter relatively inexpensively. As I was saying earlier, 5 million leaseholders, £3 a year, that's 15 million. That can run a pretty good regulatory system.
And was that what you referred to in terms of self-financing?
Yeah, those sort of numbers. If everybody was paying the levy that the managing agent has to pay, if that was being passed on to the consumer, then there are 5 million consumers leasehold. It's annoying, but not the end of the world.
Yeah, Chris.
Just in terms of process, we're obviously doing the scrutiny of the legislation, and this is an important part of that. From your conversations and your work over such a long period of time, what do you think it would be useful for us to say in order to continue to push for the debate? Do you think it would be easiest to say, put it in here? Do you think it would be easiest to go, okay, it can't go in here, but let's do another piece of legislation as soon as we can?
I think that would be good, although parliamentary time is precious. MHCLG's had an awful lot of the parliamentary time. It would be a few years before we see the end result. So although a comprehensive bill would be exactly what's required, I suspect the delays would make that difficult. We are promised already qualifications, mandatory qualifications for agents. So there's something coming down the track. My argument is extending that to cover a code of practice and then enforcement of that code, which is what you get a regulator to do, that isn't such a big extra to add to what government is already committed. I think we will get the qualifications in the bill. So there's going to be stuff in this bill. And if we're going to get anything in, why not get the whole, go for it while we're at it and have a regulator?
Sarah.
And just your sort of first argument and point, would there be other areas where you would point to in terms of that demonstration of how a regulator has actually enabled growth as compared to been a barrier for it?
I think, every regulator would probably tell you that they're doing a great job and making the industry safer, but also helping it to grow. I'm afraid that the examples that one tends to quote are those where it hasn't worked, and regulation hasn't worked where there's numerous different bodies doing the regulating. So you need one body, one mind. I think you want a single focus, and regulation hasn't worked if it hasn't been properly enforced. if the regulator hasn't got the powers to actually make things happen. In this case, fines, reprimands and gentle things to start with, but building up to you lose your license, you can't operate, you're out of business. And there's no good setting up a Phoenix company tomorrow because it's you that is out of business. You have the license as an individual, as well as your firm being registered. So I think that there are bad examples of where regulation can get in the way, but we learn from those lessons, and the lesson is don't confuse everything by having a lot of different bodies all involved in the regulatory process, and concentrate your firepower, and good regulation works.
And if perhaps stepping back, the main goal of this whole area of legislation is to try and fundamentally reduce the costs to the individual of owning and managing their property, if that was one of the driving priorities, what do you think are the risks going forward as we are with the bill as it stands to achieving that, based on the impact management agencies have on that issue of cost?
Yeah. The managing agent does have an influence. This has been played down by some people. They say, well, even if you enfranchise, look after it yourselves, have the powers that Commonhold would bring to you, you'd still have the same costs of a managing agent. I don't buy that. A lot of these costs are to do with the managing agents themselves. They're to do with the scams at the worst end, but they're just to do with the ineffectiveness, the extra charges, the commissions, the permission fees for all kinds of stuff. I think there's a lot of savings which, if you were in command instead of some freeholder and you were controlling the and you can tell the managing agents that, I'm sorry, you're going to have to go. We're going to get rid of you. We're going to appoint somebody else. If you have that power, I think costs come down. They don't go up. So I wouldn't worry about increased costs. The increase will come from recognising that you need to set aside money for a reserve, for a sinking fund for the long term. But when everyone can see what's going on, when this is explained, and it may be irritating that you've got to put aside money and you're planning to leave in 2 years' time, and you won't be there for the new lift, but you understand what it is that the money is for. Yeah. This is spelled out. The
transparency element, that's the key thing that comes back to us.
Absolutely.
People receiving bills for work which is so opaque they have to go through line by line. Then when they do go through line by line, they actually find they've been charged for something that doesn't relate to their block at all.
Right. Right, and at the very best they get, oh, sorry, we didn't notice that. Apologies, we won't do it again. But people need to feel threatened that they can be fired. And I think that one of the main advantages of Commonhold is you're in charge, you can get rid of the managing agent, and they know that you can get rid of them.
Sarah.
And I think you have to some extent sort of clarified this, but your position, if there were to be further provisions brought forward in this bill, you would be prioritising the code of practice, but really would like to see all of the recommendations from your working group brought forward into this.
Yeah, I think the key thing is to have a regulator. Government at the moment is talking about using designated professional bodies. That's the RICS and the Property Institute, TPI, to do the work, and then spread some of it amongst duties on trading standards officers, some to do with the Ombudsman service.
All who are overstretched.
All kinds of overstretched people, theoretically giving this a new priority, and no regulator, no single mind behind all of this. So I think my key one is, yes, qualifications, that's really great, but just being qualified doesn't necessarily make you behave properly. You still need a code of practice, and you still need enforcement. You need an agency, that's what they do. They enforce the code.
And might you agree that resources invested in those alternatives would not be the best use of public money versus the opportunity of a regulator.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're going to spend the money, spend it on a regulator. But I think also there are conflicts of interest. If we're going to give this job to professional bodies who are dependent on the subscriptions from their members, they've got to be nice to their members ultimately, and it's quite difficult to also be the regulator. And it's not your top priority. This is a secondary business. Let's have a regulator.
A new one.
A new one.
With enforcement powers.
Precisely.
As opposed to a letter saying you've been currently suspended, but then you can come back.
Exactly. We don't want any of that nonsense.
Thank you very much, Lord Best. I think this is an issue that will continue to come up as we discuss the Commonhold and Freehold legislation in full before we get the final bill. Just to thank all our guests for coming this morning and for